Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 20 in our continuing study of the Book of Proverbs. We're still in that section, the Proverbs of Solomon, chapters 10 through 24, and we subdivided that the righteous versus the wicked, living the wise life, and words of the wise. We're in the center section there, living the wise life. And part of living the wise life sometimes is the contrast, looking at the life of the fool and saying, don't go there. Chapter 20 and verse 1, we start off that way, the way of folly. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler. Now, when you have that term mocker, remember we saw back in chapter 19, verses 28 and 29, the Hebrew word litz. It had been translated two different ways. In verse 28, it had been called a rascally witness makes a mockery. Same way here. But then in verse 29, it was translated, judgments are prepared for scoffers. So wine is a scoffer, a mocker, take your pick. Just be consistent. Um, Strong drink, he goes on, is a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wine. Let me just say, with regards to wine, the Bible doesn't actually say, don't ever drink wine. In the ancient world and in many parts of the world today, water is not all that good to drink. Sometimes it's actually unhealthy. And so the healthier thing to drink is wine. Of course, it might not be as strong as we have in some of today's stores and things like that. But what is warned against is using too much drink, getting intoxicated by it. That's just not wise. Verse 2, the terror of a king, and we're still looking at the way of folly. The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. Um, don't mess with people in authority. That's what's being said. It's just like you don't go messing with a lion. Don't go trying to get a lion angry at you. Don't go trying to get a king angry at you. And don't try to go get someone who is in authority, who has uh, power in society and so on, angry at you. That doesn't mean you necessarily compromise your standards. If you're preaching the gospel and God is the bigger one in authority, let's just say it that way. Um, but don't go out of your way just to antagonize people in authority, just for no good reason. Um, Verse 3, keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. Notice the linkage between these two, provoking somebody to anger that has power and authority, keeping away from strife, quarreling. Those are all foolish things. Verse 4, the sluggard, well, we're back to the sluggard. Remember the lazy person. The sluggard does not plow after the autumn, so he begs during the harvest and has nothing. He hasn't prepared for the future, and so the future catches him unawares. Now, notice all three of these, they're not all the same. The first two deal with anger and strife and quarreling. The third one in verse 4 deals with the lazy. Verse 5, a plan in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. Now we've shifted gears to another set of proverbs. Notice a plan. You never know how all the twists and turns it might be, but somebody who has understanding will look at the possibilities and plan it out carefully. This is the idea of planning ahead. So planning, notice, versus doing. We often said in the fire department that you can have a plan, a pre-plan, sometimes a plan drawn up on the spot, but you also have to have alternatives. What happens if your plan doesn't work? You go to plan B, and I've been on fire scenes where we went to C, D, E, and F, and before we finally got the fire under control. Verse 6, many a man proclaims his own loyalty. Now that term loyalty is our old friend chesed. And this is the way I prefer to translate it, loyalty. So I'm going to stick with that. Many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? Again, we had planning versus doing in verse 5. Now it's saying versus being. It's one thing to say you're loyal. It's another thing to actually carry through. Verse 7, a righteous man who walks in his integrity, how blessed are his sons after him. So blessing the one who walks. What we've been seeing in all three of these is saying versus doing. Notice the one who walks, he's not just talking about it. He's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk. And his sons receive a blessing from that. Continuing that same theme of saying versus doing, verse 8, a king who sits on the throne of justice disperses all evil with his eyes. You see, a king who's really sharp, he can see what's right and what's wrong. Nobody's going to trick him, deceive him. He's going to be able to discern, to determine, and he judges those who do, not just those who say a certain thing. Continuing that saying theme, look at verse 9. Who can say, I have cleansed my heart, I'm pure from sin? Now, that's a rhetorical question. It really, nobody can say. Everybody is guilty. Everybody has had some issues somewhere along the line. You can say all you want, but it's a matter of doing that which is right. Verse 10, differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to the Lord. Now, the weight and the measure, you say, well, what's wrong with the weight and measure? Remember, that's the way that they had of telling the value of something. So we would say a dishonest cash machine. You go to the bank, think about how they have those thing called ATM machines. You put your card in and it gets money out from your account. Well, that's great if it works honestly. Imagine what it would be like if you went in and you took out maybe $20 and meanwhile it recorded that you were taking out $800 and it was stealing the rest. That wouldn't be very good. That would be an abomination. And that's the point here. So a call for integrity. Verse 11, it is by his deeds, and we already said this area is saying versus doing. It is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself if his conduct is pure and right. It's one thing to say, I'm doing the right thing, or that I'm going to do something, but your deeds and your conduct speak for you. They speak louder. Actions speak louder than words. That's the point that's being made here. Verse 12, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made both of them. Now, we're going to have here a series of doublets. That is, not just two lines, but two proverbs side by side. And they're going to, at first, be different, but if we look carefully, I think we'll see they are joined, sort of joined at the hip. So the hearing ear, the seeing eye, each of these is going to have its own point. So notice you have the ear, the eye. The Lord has made both of them. When we get to the second verse, verse 13, do not love sleep or you will become poor. Open your eyes. Did you hear that? You have the ears and the eye. And now open your eyes and you will be satisfied with food. Okay, now the first section of verse 12 talks about opportunity, where you have the hearing ear, the seeing eye. The Lord has made both of them. He has given you ears to hear and eyes to see. So do so. Remember, Jesus used that phrase oftentimes. He would say, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. You've got the opportunity to hear truth. Listen up and take it, hear it, and then apply it. Make the most of this opportunity. Verse 13, do not love sleep or you'll become poor. Open your eyes and you'll be satisfied with food. This is a spiritual wake-up call. I guess it's a wake-up call of any sort. It doesn't have to be spiritual. But I think we can apply it too to spiritual situations. If if all you do is sleep, you say, "I know I've got to get up in the morning, but I'm going to just hit the alarm clock on snooze. I'm going to go back to bed." Um, that's not going to do well for me. And so, open your eyes and you'll be satisfied with food. In other words, get to work, make the most of that opportunity, wake up. Now, notice here we have the way I have phrased it, we have a business theme. I think this business theme is going to carry us through a number of the next proverbs. So let's go. Let's keep, we've got doublets and business theme as we move forward. Bad, says the buyer. That's why I think it's business. Notice there's a buyer. But when he goes his way, then he boasts. Now, what's the point here? Here, somebody goes to buy something, and as he's purchasing it, he's saying, I can't believe I'm buying this. This isn't very good. I shouldn't be spending all this money on this." And what he's done, remember, this is the marketplace of the Middle East. You wouldn't just go in and say, "What's the price?" and then pay the price. You would negotiate. You would bargain. You say, "That thing I'm going to buy, that's not worth anything. I'll give you, a quarter what you were asking." And it goes back and forth. But notice, When he walks away, then he says, "Man, did I get a good deal? Look, I I managed to get him to lower his price considerably, and I got a deal." Verse 15, there is gold and an abundance of jewels, but the lips of knowledge are a more precious thing. So notice what the buyer says in verse 14, and then he boasts. And then now in verse 15, the lips of knowledge, you have a saying theme, still connected with business, still a doublet. The lips of knowledge are a more precious thing. And so the point that he's making is that knowledge has value. Knowledge is a precious thing. And hearing that which is rightly said, well, let me just say, that's worth its weight. Can I say it this way? It's worth its weight in gold. Verse 16, um, take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger, and for foreigners hold him in pledge. Still that business theme. Now, when we talked in a past class about when one becomes surety, what's happening there is you've gone into partnership with somebody and you're guaranteeing, um, if they lose whatever they have invested, that thing, remember, they did not necessarily have coins and money, but they would do so with valuables, sometimes with weights of silver and or gold or other precious things. And someone who was surety, they were saying, I guarantee whatever has been taken will be returned. And if not, then I will make it up myself. So notice, take his garment when he becomes a surety for a stranger. Here's somebody who guaranteed, and he guaranteed the return, um, entering into a partnership with somebody he didn't really know. He didn't know, is this an honest person or a dishonest person? Is this a hard worker or a lazy person? Let me just say, it's been my experience that there are rarely any equal partnerships. Most partnerships are unequal to some degree. So here, this person who's entered into a partnership, he loses his garments. He loses the shirt on his back. And for foreigners, hold him in pledge. So the term there, arav. Now, what's interesting is when we get to the next verse, and it means surety. That I'm not contesting the translation, but we're going to have in the next verse a word that sounds very much like it. Sometimes you have certain words that have a variety of meanings, and you might pronounce them slightly different. Like think about desert versus dessert. um, a desert, that's out in the wasteland. A dessert might be an action that you leave somebody in the desert, or you go to the ice cream parlor and you eat your dessert. Now, there's three different meanings with not exactly the same spelling, and that's what happens here. Bread obtained by falsehood is sweet. Notice it's still the same three consonants, but you pronounce it slightly different. Instead of arav, it's arev. You say, I can't even hear the difference. Yes, one of the vowels changed slightly in its pronunciation. And again, that has the idea of sweet, so good translation. But I want you to see the connection here in those two terms. Bread obtained by falsehood is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be filled with gravel. In other words, you get something by falsehood, by lying about it, and what you got wasn't worth the trouble of being known as a dishonest person, the trouble that you might get from your neighbors or other potential business partners that now won't deal with you, uh, or even the trouble you get from above. So notice we had foolish partnerships. And now we have just the truth that lies come back to bite you, to haunt you. If not in this life, in the next. But really, the Proverbs are talking about what happens in this life. Even in this life, it's just a foolish thing to do. Verse 18, prepare plans by consultation and make war by wise guidance. So notice this is the idea of planning and making war. When you make war, you do make plans, and these two lines are describing essentially the same thing: by consultation, by wise guidance. I have two lines saying the same thing with different words. And so this is just the point of preparing strategy, preparing what you're going to do. In trouble, I would say even in business and things like that, you want to plan out and prepare what you're going to do. Again, I go back to my experience in the past as a battalion chief with the fire department. We would make pre-plans, buildings and structures and hazardous places, so that we would have an idea what's there, and then we would sit down. What are the possible problems we can run into, and what would we do with it as a result? So planning ahead. Verse 19: He who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a gossip. Now, here's the need. There's times when secrecy is needed, especially when you're making plans, especially when you're getting ready to go to war. We said, even though each of these proverbs has its own point, they are connected. And I think they're connected here. Sometimes there's a need for secrecy, especially if it's in cases of warfare. But sometimes even in business, sometimes you not need to avoid letting your competition know what you're going to be planning, what you're going to be doing. It can prepare them and then undercut what you're accomplishing. Verse 20: He who curses his father or his mother, and remember that was just a bad thing no matter how you slice it. He who does that, his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness. Now, the point there is that those are things you shouldn't be doing. Family is family, and you should. Let me just say, you can pick your friends. Your family is your family, and they will always be your family. So don't go burning those bridges. That would be silly. Verse 21: An inheritance. Remember, an inheritance is something you get from family. So notice the connection. An inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be blessed in the end. Now, here are different points being made. This is the hazard of getting rich quickly. It's one thing if you were able to gain riches and you maybe start off very poor, but then as time went on, just because of wise investment and hard work, you were able to get to a point where you're more comfortable financially or other ways. And the point is, if you worked at it, if it came gradually, you sort of got used to the idea. You learned as you went on how to protect those investments, as opposed to somebody that suddenly gets rich very quick. I think of stories that I've heard. I don't know of anyone personally who won the lottery, and suddenly they went from being either poor or just normal to being ultra, ultra, ultra rich. And how many people have I heard who, within a very short time, had lost it all? Who went from being poor to rich to being poor again, and they didn't receive the blessing of their riches because it was gained too hurriedly. Verse 22. Now, notice here that the name of the Lord is going to be used. That's why I call it the Yahweh theme. Now, our translation has capital L, capital O, capital R, capital Z, Lord in all capital letters. That's the translator's way of letting you know this is the name of God. Yahweh is how we would normally pronounce it. Some folks, have a slightly different pronunciation. But remember, the Hebrew wasn't written with vowels. You had vowel points added later on. And so, as a result, because a lot of the Jewish people avoided pronouncing the name, how it was pronounced was, well, it's contested. It's open for discussion. Um, but notice he has the name of the Lord there. Again, in verse 23, an abomination of the Lord. Again, in verse 24, a man's steps are ordained by the Lord. And then verse 25, it won't have the name Lord, but it's going to have this idea of being holy. So let's look at these proverbs, beginning in verse 22. Do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. That's the problem of injustice. We're going to see it again in the next verse. Almost more of these doublet ideas. Notice when somebody cheats you, you don't have to go out and try to do bad against them. You can wait and let the Lord take care of that. And then verse 23, the same idea, the problem of injustice. Differing weights are an abomination of the Lord. We already saw that in an earlier proverb. And a false scale is not good. Again, those are problems, two proverbs dealing with injustice. Verse 24, man's steps are ordained by the Lord. How then can man understand his way? There's certain things about life that are just sort of mysterious. And we're going to see the problem here of mystery. That a man's steps are And notice the translators have inserted the phrase or the term ordained. The Hebrew just says the man's steps are by the Lord, but that's the idea. In other words, he's the one who planned it and who brought it into being. And if God is the one who planned it, then how can we really understand our whole life? You see, you're in your life. You don't get to see your life from the outside looking in. And things, when you're looking at things from an inside perspective, you don't have an outside perspective. You don't have that perspective of time. And so it takes time to to see the value of a life, to see how well it has gone. There have been times, let me just say, I remember that a certain person was running for president, and he had just become president. And I was asked, "How do you think he is as president?" And I said, ask me again in about 20 years, and we'll see. Because I'm not, I look at some of his decisions. I'm not sure they're the best decisions, but what do I know? Maybe it will turn around and work delightfully. When anybody is the leader of your country, you want them to do well because it's your country. It's like wanting the pilot of an airplane in which you're flying. You want him to do a good job because if he doesn't, you're going to crash. That's the idea here. Verse 25, it is a trap for a man to say rashly, it is holy, and after the vows to make inquiry. That is, once you've said, "Hey, this is," when I say this is holy, in other words, I'm guaranteeing that this is true, this is holy. I'm sealing this with a vow. But then after the vows, you don't go back and say, "Gee, should I do that?" No, ask before you get into it, um, and then you can say, okay, that was worth doing. I've seen, and notice I'm going to draw these two ideas together. I've seen this in good perspective. I've taken a careful look, and now I have made my decision. Verse 26, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them. Now, winnowing, that's when you talk about cutting for example, if it's grain, you cut the stalks, you cut it all down, and then you're going to gather it and you're going to thresh it. These are farming terms. And so a wise king doesn't just do this with the wheat, he doesn't just do this on the farm, but he cuts down the wicked and he threshes them. He sort of chews them up and spits them out. That's the idea here. And then verse 27, the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord. There's the name of God again. The spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the innermost parts of his being. And then loyalty and truth preserve the king. We started with a wise king, and then we went from the king to the Lord, which the Lord is our spiritual king. And then loyalty and truth preserve the king, and he upholds his throne by righteousness. So we have the king's judgment in verse 26. Then we have discernment before the Lord. And then finally in verse 28, we have the result of that, upholding the throne by righteousness. Verse 29, the glory of young men is their strength. Now I want you to see each term here. The glory of young men is their strength. And then I'm going to say it, but I'm going to shift it around a little bit. The honor is a bit like glory. The honor of old men isn't their strength, it's their gray hair. Let me just say, I'm an old fellow. My strength isn't what it used to be. My hair isn't what it used to be either. It's been gradually getting more and more gray. So there's a parallel there. You're saying, on the one hand, there's some contrast, but you're completing the idea that the strength doesn't last, but gray hair will. I know some people that don't keep their hair, but the idea is there. In other words, as you get old, hopefully you keep something, not strength, but some other things as well. And then verse 30, stripes that wound score away evil. That is, they scour away evil. The idea is that they remove evil. My father was a believer in that. He would, let me just say, when we were very young, he would spank to remove the evil actions or attitudes from us. And strokes, notice stripes and strokes, we're saying the same thing. Strokes reach the innermost parts. And so this is making the point that pain can be a teacher. My father believed that, and I think he had a point there. I didn't enjoy it at the time. No discipline is pleasant, but it did a work within me that I think was positive. Now, there's a lesson that we can learn from this. The reason it's here in the Proverbs isn't telling you to go ahead and make sure that you whip your children. No, that's not the point here. The point is that pain can be a teacher, and so don't waste your pain. If something's happened that is hurt, learn from it. My senior pastor likes to say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think that works here. Pain is a terrible thing to waste. Make sure it gets used so that you don't have to get hurt by that same pain at a later date for the same reason.